Okay, so we'll call the meeting to order. Kelly, if you would just take a quick roll of the commission and charter review so we know who's here.
Sure. Mayor Rosone? Oh, if you can unmute your microphones when I call roll. I'll start with City Commission first. Mayor Owen?
Here.
Vice Mayor Colodi?
Here.
Commissioner Hartman?
Here.
Commissioner McGurk?
Here.
Commissioner Sachs?
Here.
All right, and now for the Charter Review Committee, Marie Bushy?
Here.
Marty Donaher?
Here.
Christine Elnitsky?
Here.
Sally Gillespie?
Here.
Kirk Jones?
Here.
Lisa Martin?
Here.
Marvell Richards?
Here.
Terry Dallas? Terry?
Sorry.
Okay. Eric Preston?
Here.
And Tricia Tudine?
Here.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So a couple of housekeeping items up front. If you would keep your mic on mute unless you're going to speak. Otherwise, especially if you don't have any kind of a headphone system, if you're listening to the device audio, if you're not muted, it just tends to start creating some feedback loops, and it's painful for everyone else on the line. So again, if you can, just keep yourself muted, and if we develop problems with that, we'll come back to it. Also, Zoom does have a chat function, but we're asking you don't use that chat function. So just out of an abundance of caution, I want to make sure everything stays on the record and that chat isn't saved anyway. So we just don't use the chat function within the meeting. So first, thank you all. Thanks to the Charter Review Committee and their abundant foresight of not having this meeting in person tonight. So we all didn't have to break out our canoes and kayaks to get to the Brandon Center in the middle of what seems to be a tropical something out there. And thank you for your work and efforts over these past few months, I think since November. So been a tremendous amount of time and energy that's gone into this, and I'm excited about tonight and what this represents, which is really kind of the next phase or step. So I was just going to say a few words, kind of set the stage of where we're at and what tonight is about. We did want to have public participation if there are members of the public that wanted to participate. So we'll do that right after that. And then I'll turn it over to Marilyn and she'll kind of kick it off from there. So for me tonight, what this is this is kind of the next step or phase or iteration of the process. So it's about the commission having a chance to listen and ask questions of the Charter Review Committee. I may call it the CRC if you'll allow me. For absolute clarity, the commission isn't making any decisions tonight. We haven't talked about this at all as a commission, and we're really not going to have the chance tonight to get in and debate things or talk things through enough to make a decision. This is about us listening and hearing you all that have spent the past, however many months that is, 6-7 months going through this process. I can't say that I listened to every minute of every meeting of the CRC. Some of that was intentional, actually, because I feel like 99% of the public isn't going to have done that either. So I wanted to kind of see how this came to me from the public's vantage point. Again, as I said, you've been meeting since last November, which feels like another lifetime ago. Reviewed the charter line by line, word by word. Tonight, you're kind of handing it over. And then from here, the commission will go through a process to determine if there's other changes we'd like to make to see added or subtracted. We'll talk through some of that tonight. And then determine how to best include this on the ballot. You all have made a recommendation, but we'll have to talk through that process. And we'll talk through some of that tonight. All of that has to be wrapped up by August 18th. And included in your packages is a timeline of kind of where things go from here. But August 18th is what we're working on. So from August until November, it becomes really, to me, an educational campaign for the city. So we haven't gotten there yet, but I picture a series of forums where the public can hear more about the charter in general and the proposed changes and have a chance to ask any questions. And hopefully we get good engagement from that. And I'm very hopeful that you all, our committee members, will will continue to help us be involved in that education process. And so we'll keep you posted as that evolves. But in light of that, at the end of the meeting, something I'm going to come back to, but I just wanted to put it out there so you can be thinking about it, is want to ask your thoughts on sunsetting the committee effective at our next commission meeting. This is something Marilyn and I talked about. She brought up to me as something that is normally done in her experience, that most review committees are sunsetted when the review is complete. And that enables you all to freely participate in those education events in the community with potentially one or more of your fellow committee members, and not having to worry about sunshine things, not having to worry about things like don't use the chat function. But I will tell you, it makes no difference to me either way. I'm hopeful that you all will be ambassadors in the community, and I would just want to make that as easy on you all to do that in whatever way you so choose. So we'll come back to that at the very end, but just know that that's a decision we wanted to talk through today. So with that, I will pause for any member of the public that would like to participate. I'd ask you to keep that to 3 minutes or less, and also remembering we're not making any decisions tonight. This is more us receiving the work of the charter review. So this certainly will not be the last chance you have to speak on this item. So you don't have to cover every line of the charter. So with that, are there any members of the public that would like to speak? If you want to speak, you can just unmute or raise your hand or do something to indicate such. Let me just scroll through here and see if I see anybody. I only see a couple names that I don't recognize. And I'm not hearing or seeing anyone that wants to chime in. So we will close public participation. And with that, Marilyn, I will turn it over to you. And I think, Marilyn, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think how we wanted to go through this was she'll sort of step through. There was a summary included in the agenda package. Of course, we have the whole charter in there. And Marilyn's going to kind of step through that. And as she goes section by section, commission, if there's questions that we want to ask, I think Marilyn's going to kind of pause as she hits each section. Certainly the ones that are more in depth, maybe not every section. And that would be our chance to kind of pose a question to the charter review committee, or make any comments we'd like at that time. So Marilyn, I'll turn it over to you if you had any clarity on that. You've done this before. Nobody else on this call has. So.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mayor. Actually, this is the first time I've had this kind of final workshop for charter review on Zoom. So may be unique in my history of doing these kinds of things. Let's hope so. So first of all, I hope all of the commissioners have a copy of the final report in front of them or access to it, and also probably a copy of the revised charter. The underlined version is probably easier to look at if we have any specific questions about the wording. So again, all of the members of the committee are present at this meeting tonight, and I again want to thank them for their wonderful work and their diligence. They were a dedicated, thoughtful group. Didn't always agree. We had some lively debates, and there was a lot of back and forth, but the group really worked very well together and made my job easier than it could have been. I also want to thank the commission, because actually you ended up doing a good job of appointing a variety of people who I think well represented the city. As you can see in the introduction in the report, we were very well staffed by Kelly, the city clerk, who took care of us at every meeting and in between the meetings. And then Carrie Avalon attended most of the meetings and was always available for legal advice when we requested it. So I want to thank both of them. And I thank you all for allowing me to have the privilege of facilitating this process. So the committee actually held 9 meetings. Most of them were in person. The last couple of them were virtual meetings. And although many people did not think we would finish on time, I kept assuring the committee and the mayor, yes, we will get there. And indeed, even without having several of the meetings that had been previously scheduled, the committee was able to complete its work. And so you can see the process that we went through. The committee adopted these guidelines at the very first meeting. I won't go through them, but the significant thing in those guidelines were that everything was done by consensus. So we did not have votes on every issue at every meeting. In fact, we debated back and forth, and several times issues came up at the next meeting and the next meeting, and I think that's why people thought we might be bogging down. But indeed, it was really an opportunity for people to think through some of these ideas, refine their thoughts, and come back and be able to either come to agreement or not come to agreement. So everything that's recommended in this report was approved by more than a majority of the committee. We had to have consensus, and that generally ranged at least 70% of the committee members thought this was something that should be forwarded to the city commission. Things that were just borderline are not in this report. And certainly there were ideas presented that didn't get any support, got minimal support, and some that were half and half, but not strong enough of a consensus to send it forward. We had, I'll say, fair public participation. I think most of you know I've done many of these around the state, and in many cities we have no public attending any of the meetings. And New Smyrna, we did have a core group of people, some of the same ones who came to most of the meetings, who spoke at the public comment periods that we had at the beginning and at the end of each meeting. And then even when we went virtual, we had some of those same citizens participating. So I would say your level of participation was about average of what I see, certainly better than in many cities. It's important that you know that the members of the committee were each given a copy of the model charter. I don't think that's going to show up. That's put out by the National Civic League. This was an important tool that they used throughout the process. It's a document that's put together by a nonpartisan group out of Denver that pulls together elected officials, city managers, academics, civic groups periodically to put together what they perceive as really good charter information. And they give you a lot of pros and cons. And so our committee relied fairly heavily on the model charter. And in fact, you'll see things from the model charter have been recommended to be added to the New Smyrna charter. So I'm going to, and then of course, I think you all realize that this report was voted on at the last meeting, and the vote was unanimous. All 10 members of the committee were present at the meeting, and everyone voted in favor of what's in this report and forwarding this report to you. So that was really significant for you to know that while there were certainly issues that people differed on and debated on, in the end, everyone came together to support what you have before you. So basically, there were no changes made to your form of government, your structure. They wanted to stay with the same size city commission, still have you elected from the 4 zones, still have the exact same terms of office, with the mayor being 2 years and the commissioners being 4 years. They did not want to put term limits into this charter. So the government with the new charter or the revised charter will not look different than the government you currently have. There are some details that are different, and I will point those out in particular. But basically, there was a great need to reorganize, reformat, renumber your charter. I'm sure you're all familiar with the charter that you have, and what has happened because of the way that it's organized and numbered. When you want to add something to the charter, it ends up going to the back of the document, and it gets a number, just whatever's the next number in sequence, which means you have things that relate to city commission in various parts of the charter. And you have things that relate to the city manager in different parts of the charter. So what we've done with this document, if we pulled them all together, so if someone wants to know everything that's the responsibility and the role of the city commission, it's in one article. And if they want to know about the charter officers, it's in another article. So it's going to be much easier for the citizens to be able to read and understand and find information about the city and its government in this revised edition. So as you'll see in the general provisions, not only did we reorganize, but the charter was made gender neutral. Your charter wasn't as bad as many charters, but there were still plenty of he's and hims. I don't think there were too many. His, her was there, but so all of that has been changed to be gender neutral. So let's go on now into the substance of the document. And again, as the mayor said, I'll pause at the end of each section here and allow for any questions from the commissioners. The preamble has been added. In charters, the age of your charter, you never saw preambles. That's something that the model charter added probably 10 or 15 years ago. So in charters that have been either developed or revised in that time period, you'll see many charters have a preamble, which is an opening statement like the preamble to the U.S. Constitution. It's a nice way to introduce your citizens to the charter, and it's pretty much an aspirational statement, but in your case, it really previews the content of what is to follow in the charter, because there are certainly sections that reference the things that the preamble set up. So, any questions on the preamble? Okay, so now you'll see you have, instead of chapters, and as you had before, you're going to have articles, and you'll still have sections, but each article, so Article 1 has section 1.01, 1.02, 1.03, and that's as you get to, 5 or 6 years from now and you want to add something to that first article, it just becomes 1.08, 1.09, and that's going to make it very easy to amend the charter in the future. So the first article deals with the general establishment of the city and powers. Things that didn't change are not referenced in these recommendations. So these are just things that have been added or changed that you'll see. So powers of the city, now you have, and you've always had, but all the powers that a city can possibly have under the laws of the U.S. government and the state government. And there's no need to delineate these. So in your charter, I believe it starts to talk about you have the power to do this, this, and this, and you can't possibly list everything you can do. So now one simple statement gives you all the powers that you can possibly have. I'm going to just pause. I doubt there's any questions on this. Oh, maybe there is. Yes. Commissioner?
First of all, I made a specific point of not appearing at any of your meetings other than I think the first one, because I felt you were best left alone to make your own decisions as members of the city. And you did a great job. But that's good. Now, to my questions. On section 1.01.A in parentheses, little 2 in parentheses, and little a in parentheses, it says that incorporating into the city must be made by a resident who lives on the property. It doesn't allow people who own vacant property to sign in.
Okay, well, I will tell you this whole annexation is exactly what you have in your current charter. And when the committee looked at it, they debated whether to leave the whole thing in there or not, because you do have to follow state annexation laws. But your charter goes a little further, and that's what the committee liked, the details that were in here. So they didn't want to make any changes other than we did talk about it list in the current charter, the supervisor of registration. There's no such person. It's either the supervisor of elections. And we had some concern because only Freeholders vote in this annexation process, and the supervisor might not know if they're property owners. So we changed it to the property appraiser. That's something that I think Carrie will have to research a little further if you leave that change in there to make sure that we've got the correct constitutional officer listed. But
My question is strictly limited to that little A section.
yeah,
Must a person live in New Smyrna to apply to be included in it? Must they be a resident of town inside our service boundary agreement? Or can a person who owns vacant land apply to be joined in?
I would ask.
According to how I understand this, they're not allowed to.
Yeah, I would ask the city attorney to talk about that because that again is your current law. So
So, Marilyn, if I may, I think probably the best way to go through this, because I don't think we'll have time tonight to get all those kind of questions answered. So I guess my question would be, from the charter review's perspective, did anyone have strong, is that an intentional addition to the charter made by the review committee? And, does anyone have a strong feeling on that as to why it would or would not be? And if not, then as we go through Commissioner Colodi or Vice Mayor Colodi, our process, I think the city attorney will have to kind of go through this with us and help us and make sure we understand some of those things.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a concern of mine. It doesn't have to be answered now. I think it's a little restrictive, and I don't know if we've been following it at this point because we've let in some vacant properties. So that's it. I will need some type of answer before I can vote on the same thing.
Sure. And like I said, the committee made no changes to this section other than the identification of the individual who approves the signatures on the petitions. So that is something that you'll have to deal with, and we'll move on. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. We're looking to revise the current, and if the current's not what we want, we should look to change it.
Absolutely, I agree. And it's
Thank you.
and you're not the only city that isn't always following their charter. We find sometimes the charters are out of date, and the city is doing one thing and the charter says something else. So if there are areas that we haven't addressed that you need to clean up, then that's certainly your right and purview to do that.
Thank you.
So in 1.02, this is just language from the model charter that says if you're ever challenged about any of your powers, the courts are to interpret very liberally that you have the right to do the things that cities are allowed to do. Okay, and then we'll deal with 1.03, which is intergovernmental relations. And we know that your city interacts with governments within the county, within the region, within the state. And so this is just an affirmation letting your citizens know that you do that and that you have the right to do that. So the committee felt it was important to add a section on intergovernmental relations. So the next area where we had something that was changed is under 2.03, and Article 2 deals with the City Commission, and 2.03 is the powers and duties of the City Commission. And so again, we gave the City Commission all the powers that you're allowed to have under the Constitution, the state, and the Volusia Charter, because there are things that the county does that you are not allowed to do, for example, the beach regulations and things like that. But other than that, you're allowed to do anything unless it's prohibited in the charter. The committee did add two things to your powers and duties. One is that you will conduct annual performance reviews on the charter officers. That's the attorney, the clerk, and the manager. There was strong sentiment from people in the public for this and from members of the committee to make sure that that happens. And another mandate in the charter is that the City Commission will conduct annual strategic planning process. And it's not defined how you'll do that, but the requirement that you do that annually. Okay, another question. Yes, sir.
I read these things, every single word.
Good.
So I think it's a good idea to put this section in. I think we should, as you said, it's not defined. I would like to see it defined better, whether it's strategic planning has to have some type of definition or whatever. I can live with it the way it is, but I think it's a little vague. Thank you.
Right. So now we're going to move on to section 2.04, qualifications of members. And in this section, there was one change made. Currently, the zone commissioners have to live in that zone for 6 months prior to qualifying, although all of the elected officials have to live in the city for a year prior to qualifying. So the committee wanted to change the qualification for the zone to have to live in the zone for a year prior to qualifying. Okay, any questions? Yes, Commissioner Ricker.
Thank you. I was just wondering what, I guess the question is why make that change? Looking for some insight.
Okay, let me ask if any of the members of the committee want to respond to that, because one of you came up with that idea and I don't remember who, but does anyone want to respond to that? They were so talkative at the meetings.
I know.
If no one else wants to respond, I will. But I mean,
Okay.
Eric, if you want to respond, that's fine.
I just think that we were all of the opinion that we want to make sure that the person who is representing us is invested in our city.
Yeah.
It was focused on, knowing your zone and knowing the communities in your zone and spending enough time there.
Okay. Is that it? Okay. So section 2.05 is prohibitions. So you had some of these in various parts of the charter, but we have added some new things, and this again is dealing with the commission. So now if you want to work for the city for compensation after you leave office, you have to wait for 1 year after leaving office before you can apply. And the rationale for that is there have been instances where sitting commissioners created positions that they knew they wanted to fill when they left office. So this means, if you do something like that, that's fine. You create a position, but you can't apply for it until a year after you leave office. So that was added into this. And we also, it doesn't mean you can't serve on an appointed non-compensated position, but you can't be paid for work that you would do for the city after you leave office. And it was very unusual in your charter as a commission manager form of government that you didn't have the prohibition of not interfering with the day-to-day administration or trying to control the appointment or removal of any staff member who's under the management of the city manager. And so that has been put into this charter. I'm probably sure that all of the commissioners are well aware of how this form of government works, but it's important in the charter to specify so that the commissioners are under the understanding that they are absolutely prohibited from doing those kinds of activities. Now, if you look at the language that we put into the 2.05, it is not to keep, and if you look at C, interference with administration, it still allows the members of the committee to ask questions, get information, to assist you in decision-making and formulating your policies. So it's not to prohibit you from interacting with the staff that's under the manager or the clerk or the attorney, but it is to keep the elected officials from getting involved in the day-to-day, giving orders, trying to control the work of the people who are under your charter officers.
Marilyn, I think Vice Mayor had some comments, and then I see Jake's unmuted. He may want to as well, but we'll go to Vice Mayor first.
Okay, 2.05A in parentheses, the second sentence says no commission member shall be employed by the city of New Smyrna Beach. We're employees now. So that wording got to be either taken out or made more clear that we can still be employees after we've been elected.
Okay.
I fully understand and support the after the fact, but that sentence is wrong.
Yeah, we'll have to clean up that language and make sure it's just clear. It's no other position besides the elected position, I think is the intent. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. I agree with that.
And
Commissioner Sachs, did you have something?
Yes, quick question for Marilyn. It's not in this section, but speaking of commission and board members, is there any section that says that a commission or board member can serve only on one board, or can they serve on more than one board?
I don't think it's specified in here. If you're talking about serving on a regional board, something outside the city. And, you know, the Florida law has a statute about dual office holding. So it would really depend on what kind of position it was and if that was something that came under that state law. But we don't have anything in the charter referencing that.
You're talking about the advisor, like
The advisory
citizen?
boards, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that's in this charter. I'm trying to remember. That may be in just like an ordinance. I think some of our things have ordinances. Carrie, go ahead.
Right here, Karen.
Yeah, there's state law on dual office holdings. So those are your boards. If you have final recommendation decision making authority, that you can't be on two of those boards at once. And then each of your resolutions, some of them said specifically in your resolution you couldn't serve on another board. So those are the two things at play.
Okay, thank you.
So I had just one comment for the Charter Review Committee, and this is the kind of stuff as we go through it, we'll just have to take a look at. So I wanted to alert you to it, and then just if anyone had concerns, now's your chance to share. But as I read like 205 section C, completely get it, completely agree with it. We operate by this, but you think about in a state of emergency. There are certain powers that are given to the mayor and or others can be delegated that would cut through this. So it may be covered by an earlier section that says we can interpret this liberally, or we may have to just add some language there for clarity that in certain times there's provisions around that. So any concerns from the Charter Review, and of course, City Attorney will help to clarify that and draft some language. I also had one other question, just to get to something of substance. I don't want to relitigate the entire thing, but I did just want to really, really briefly maybe hear from one on each side. So we'll just take whoever jumps in first. But no recommendation was made around term limits. And I know that came up a few different times, was probably debated around a few times. And I'm just curious what the thought was. Really, the thoughts for are usually pretty clear, but I'm curious kind of what the thought was for those that, it didn't end up here, obviously. So what was the thought process behind kind of what was the concern around putting term limits into this document? Any on the Charter Review want to jump in on that?
I can kick it off, I guess. We debated this issue over, I want to say like at least 3 meetings. It came up several times. And there were some of us that came in really strong for them and some that were adamantly against them for different reasons. And as the talks continued, I think we all became more and more conflicted about it. We really, even if we took a vote, it was like we were so wishy-washy on it, not really being able to pick a side, that we ultimately ended up walking away and leaving it without. But there was a lot of debate about it. Maybe some of our other members can bring up the specific reasons, but I know some of them were concerning, what if we have a great person in there and they want to keep going and they're not burnout? And then the other side, but what if they are burnout and they try to keep going? It was like we just kept going back and forth, and we could never get a consensus. So that's why we ultimately left it out. But maybe some other members can shed a little more light on that.
Anyone that was really against it, that's kind of the vantage point I'm wanting to hear. Because in my research and in talking with Marilyn, she said basically anytime this is on the ballot, it passes. So I was actually pretty surprised it was in front of this committee and it didn't get included. So what, any thoughts? Anyone that was against it, what was the vantage point there? Kurt, go ahead.
Yeah. The reason I was against it is there's only a few things that the citizens really get to do, and that's one of them, vote who they want in there in office. And so if you have someone representing you and they're doing a good job, now we're restricting them, the thing that we don't want to do. That's why we're here, trying to keep our citizens active in what they do, and that's put in people or take them out. And I guess what I'm trying to say, over the time, if you have a real problem with a commissioner, you have recall. You can take them out that way. So I just thought maybe we were being a little bit too restrictive in our ability as citizens to make that decision. That's how
Interesting. That's really interesting.
Our citizens are paying attention. They know what they're doing. They know who, I know we kicked around maybe 3 terms. Well, 3 terms is 12 years. Hey, that's not bad. I could have gone with that. But honestly, I just felt like I don't want to restrict our citizens to make that decision.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that perspective. All right.
Okay. So move on to section 2.06, which is the judge of qualification, selection, and forfeiture. So in your current charter, the commission currently is the judge of qualifications if you're qualified for office, but we've added election and forfeiture, and it's really a very detailed procedure for forfeiture has been added. Forfeiture is very rare. It hardly ever happens, but it does happen. And in fact, our committee was well aware that it happened in Volusia County a couple of years ago, where the mayor was removed from office through forfeiture. And one of the problems in that city when they did that, they had no procedure in their charter. So we've now put in a very detailed procedure if a member of the city commission or the mayor are brought up on charges of potential forfeiture. Now it's spelled out in a lot of detail how you go about. And due process is certainly an important part of this. So while we don't think this would probably ever be used, it's not a bad idea to have it in there in case there is a need. And, sometimes there are renegades who get elected to office and, need to be removed by a process. So that's why that forfeiture has been added to that.
Marilyn, is this a part of the model charter? I would imagine.
Actually, they have forfeiture in the model charter, and they have that the commission is judge of forfeiture and says that you have to allow for a hearing, but it doesn't spell out step by step how you go about doing that. And I was fortunate enough just before I was doing the New Smyrna charter to work with the city of Winter Park on their charter, and their city attorney happened to have been the city attorney in DeBary when they went through their forfeiture process. And he was very much in favor of putting something like, he said, if they had had this in their charter, it would have been a much better process than what they ended up with. And this language was taken, I believe I had used it with the city of Plantation based on language in the city of West Palm Beach is where this originally came from. And it's been cleaned up and modified through different iterations, but yeah.
Okay. Vice Mayor.
The only difficulty I have with it goes into the reinstatement process. After you go through your whole, the whole procedure, which is fine, it has, it doesn't have reinstatement back to the point when they were actually removed. I didn't read it that way. Please tell me if I'm incorrect. I know if you go back to the point when they left, you have the issue of what do you do with all those votes that they didn't participate in, so on and so forth. But I think it would be unfair to a person when you try to remove them if they had to go through the whole process and not get to go back to where they left off once they've been found okay.
Yeah, I think it is in there, Vice Mayor. It's like this next to the last bullet point where it says, if after the final hearing, the city commission is unable to support such a finding by an affirmative vote of 3, and there would be only 4 people voting, so 3 out of the 4 would have to vote, that any suspension of the accused shall terminate and the accused shall be reinstated to office for any unfinished portion of the official's term.
And my problem with it is during that whole trial period, he can't get that back. And if he's been accused and found free of the charges, he should get that back. That's my position, anyhow. I like
Commissioner Hartman, I think you had something.
So, did the committee consider or address pay status, benefits, that sort of thing while they were going through this process? Because this could take 5 to 6 months to get through the entire process. By the time you have an investigation, give him 90 days and have hearings, so forth and so on. Is he still going to be receiving benefits, that sort of thing? Was any of that discussed?
That was not discussed.
Okay.
All right. So then section 2.07, which also deals with forfeiture, and these are actually setting up the grounds for forfeiture. In your current charter, residency is about the only grounds for forfeiture. If you move out of the city or out of the zone, you forfeit your office. But we've added to it violation of the charter, which is a really important consideration, so that the charter, I mean, it is your constitution. It is your, you're supposed to abide by it. So if there's a member who is not abiding by the charter, they might be brought up for forfeiture. And then, of course, conviction of a crime. Generally, the governor is going to remove someone who's convicted of a crime, but a lot of this language is pretty much from the model charter, and you'll see it in most cities' charters. We did make one change. Currently, you have, if you, a commissioner has 4 unexcused absences consecutive absences from a commission meeting, and the committee chose to reduce that to 3. So that is also in your current charter, but it's 4 instead of 3.
Question, Marilyn?
Yeah.
If, let's say you are sick, so you would ask for the commission to excuse you for purposes of illness, that would be acceptable. Let's say you did miss 3 or more meetings and you were ill. And now I'm thinking we also have virtual we've had an instance where the mayor was able to join the meeting via phone. So I wonder if you're sick, but you're still able, you are mentating properly, you're able to participate, but you cannot be there physically. If that kind of puts a wrinkle in the, you can't be, you're not there 3 consecutive times. Do we have to put it in language?
It's unexcused absences. So I think the commission has the ability to excuse. And so in a case of like a sickness, the commission would be able to excuse. I do want to talk to the city attorney about this today, not tonight, but we do need to, I think, address as a commission this excusal process as it's done now. It's probably not up to speed. So I'd like to, as a part of this, address that the commission has a more formal process around excusing a fellow commissioner. But yeah, and in a case like that, I think this is more, somebody just goes MIA and nobody knows where they're at, or they're just kind of shirking their duty. The commission wouldn't excuse them, and then after 3 of them, they'd be dismissed. This process would kick in. But if someone's ill or out of town with family related to something catastrophic, obviously the commission could excuse them, and I think that's what this covers.
Right. And should that language be more specific? I'm not sure.
There were a lot of instances where the details are not put into the charter. And that's really a policy that you all can have, or if you need an ordinance on it or whatever. But those kinds of things might change from time to time as far as without having to go through a charter amendment. So generally, we've just set up the standard, and then you can put the details in the policy you adopt.
Yes, so it makes me think, God forbid, you should be infected by COVID. You're still okay, but you can't attend. You'll miss possibly 3 meetings. So we have that kind of language.
Yeah, well, the excused process generally takes care of
that kicks in. Okay.
Yeah. So section 2.08 deals with.
Whoa.
Oh, sorry, missed somebody.
Can anybody tell me what the legal definition of moral turpitude is?
I Googled it. It is the least defined legal term, they said.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can get lists of the kinds of infractions that are included with moral turpitude, and it always comes up as a debate with cities that put this in it. One city I work with actually listed the kinds of crimes they meant by moral turpitude, but that could be a very long list. You can, if you want, you can just convict it of a felony. I mean, some cities just do that.
Yeah, I think one of the citizens made some recommendation on that I think would probably fall in line better than moral turpitude.
Eric, go ahead, Lisa.
Just that when we're on the moral turpitude, the idea of it changes. That is a cultural concept. For example, selling grass. Wasn't so long ago that would be moral turpitude. I think you'd have difficulty with that now. So it is something that evolves. There's a few things. Pedophilia seems to still hang in there, but other things may evolve with the culture.
Good point.
Okay,
Eric,
so
did you have something? I noticed you're on mute.
Yeah, I do. The point is to not be a bright line. The point is to have a term that can change with the citizens and what we think through the years. So that's that's why I think that term works very well there. Now, of course, that's a lawyer saying that, and I get paid to help define that. So.
Okay. So can we move on to vacancies, filling of vacancies? So there has been a change here in your current charter. If there's, I think, if there's less than 60 days, you make an appointment. If there's more than 60 days, you have a special election. And so we've changed that quite a bit because special elections cost a lot of money, and actually it takes a long time to set up a special election, so 60 days probably isn't even going to do it for you. But we talked about, so if there's a vacancy and there's more than 120 days remaining in the term of office, you just leave that seat vacant. And so you go ahead with 4 elected officials until the next election. And then the seat is filled at the election. If there's more than 120 days remaining in the term, then the commission appoints someone to sit in that seat until the next election. So that's a change from what we currently have. If the commission deadlocks, because there's 4 of you, and you can't decide who to appoint, and we give you 30 days to make that appointment, then you have to go to a special election. And the idea is to kind of hold the hammer over your head so you make that decision without having to go through that whole process and cost the city money for that election.
Okay.
In that,
Commissioner Arnold, go ahead.
okay, in subsection B, though, it's a bit, there's 2 thoughts on this one is, if the commission within 30 days after the vacancy occurs, as described above, a special election shall be held within 90 days after such vacancy occurs. So are you taking 30 days off of the 90 days, or are you saying instead of, it's really a total of 120 days? And my question to Kelly will be, can we, or can supervisor elections hold an election within 90 days of a vacancy, or will there be more time required? I'm not sure that specific 90 days is clarified in there, and or whether it's even doable.
Okay. Comments?
Check with Lisa on that.
Yeah. Vice Mayor?
Yes, it doesn't specifically say it, or I'm sure it's probably implied. But I think it should say that the person to be appointed should come from the zone of the person who is no longer there. I think it should specifically state that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we understood that, but you're right. You could need to specify that to make sure that happens.
Thank you.
Okay. And just so we're clear as we go through this, the goal is, as different ones chime in with these thoughts, you know, we're trying to not pontificate on every single thought that we have on this, but definitely wanted to give you a glimpse into some of the things that we will have to look at. And so, but, I was very impressed that there was a 10-0 unanimous approval of this as presented. And so if any of you feel like, hey, wait a minute, seems like you're heading in a whole different direction, this is your chance. I personally at least would like to hear that now. Obviously, most of these things are kind of Scribner type errors, just making sure there's clarity. But that's the chance and the point of this. So as a charter review, don't be shy to jump in on as we talk through some of these items. So one general comment I had, Maryland applies here and some other places, is there's a lot of date specificity in this, which I like the idea of, but it's interesting how much my perspective on that has changed even in just the last few months, and how different an operating environment can be overnight. You take Mexico City a couple of years ago, they got wiped off the map practically by a hurricane, which we're always in the eye of, it seems, as well lately. Obviously, no one would have predicted COVID. And so everywhere where I saw like this shall happen by this date, the budget will be submitted by August 1st. Look, that sounds great in a perfect environment. But again, my question for our attorney will be, what about in a case like a hurricane comes through and we're still just scrambling to survive? Do we just operate kind of in violation of the charter, or what are the recourses for things like that? So again, not for debate tonight, but just so you know kind of, I think we'll want to have some general carve out, it feels like, to say in a state of emergency, some of these dates can be superseded or something to that effect. So
that's what I was going to say, because generally, if a declared state of emergency, a lot of things change. Like we wouldn't be allowed to have this kind of meeting if we weren't under a state of emergency. So they're generally either at the state or if you need to do it at the local level. And I think we do have in the mayor's role, the mayor has emergency powers and things that you currently have. So.
A quick question.
Yeah.
So we had some residents who had misgivings and concerns about not being able to participate, but we were in a state of emergency. So that kind of covers our proceedings, correct? And they are proper that way. They felt that they couldn't participate, but yet it is correct that we can participate this way because of an emergency.
Correct. The governor's emergency orders made provisions for meeting virtually, and local governments across the state have scrambled to try to figure out how to engage the public participation. So, everybody's figuring, as Russ says, making the plane while we fly it. So we're doing the best we can. And, I believe Kelly sent out the link to this meeting today, so we're fine.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Just follow up with what the mayor had said. I really like the way this has been presented and put ahead. I don't expect any comments on what my comments are. I'm laying them out basically for our staff when we get up to the committee or the commission meetings. I really like the work that's done. I like to keep it that way. Most of my stuff is little. So if any member of the committee has any strong feelings that go against anything I'm saying now, just contact me directly, and I'll certainly take that into consideration.
Okay. So ready to move on to 2.09, which there was quite a bit of discussion on investigations. Again, this is something that comes from the model charter, although we've modified it for New Smyrna Beach. And it just allows the city commission to request investigations into the affairs of the city. And the reason it's in here is because you remember the prohibition section, which says you're not, as elected officials, to be involved in the day-to-day operations of the city manager and the people who are under the manager, the clerk, or the attorney. But if there's something that might be going on that you get a phone call about from somebody and you want to have an investigation, this allows you to do it without violating the charter, because the charter says you can't interfere. So the reason that the committee changed it to request an investigation meant that the commission isn't necessarily the one that does the investigation. You could request the state attorney, you could request the FDLE, an independent law firm that you hire, somebody to come in and look at what's going on in this department or that department because you have some concerns, and you can't have your own staff do it because they may be the ones. And again, probably never happen in New Smyrna because you've got terrific staff. But again, it's a check and balance that's put in there just in case something unethical or whatever would be happening. Okay, questions? Then on the next 2.11 and 2.12 are things that you already do. I think you may have them in ordinances. It doesn't appear in the charter. So this is just mainly to let your citizens know that that's how compensation is set for the elected officials annually by ordinance, and the voting. And this is important that they know that you have to have an affirmative vote of 3 members of the city commission to adopt any of these regulations, because under Robert's rules or parliamentary procedure, you could have a quorum of 4 people, and you could, or 3 people at a meeting. You would have a quorum, and 2 of them could vote in favor of something, an ordinance, a resolution, and it could pass, but not under your charter, not under your current ordinance. So this is just to let the citizens know that it takes at least 3 of the elected officials to pass any of these things. 2.13.
Quick question, Marilyn. Sorry to interrupt. Just recently, we kind of took a, it wasn't a voice vote, but it was kind of a head nod or thumbs up for some emergency measures. And I just wondered, they will all have to go back to yes, no, a roll call vote for everything that we do?
I think we took this language from your current ordinance, which requires that. So if you want to, that's up to you to how you want to deal with that.
Okay.
But it does put you on the record.
Yes, thank you.
On the 2.13, which is the functions and powers of the mayor.
So Jake, hang on real quick on that.
Sure.
This is ordinances, resolutions, and motions. And so, in everything we do, there's not necessarily, we're not taking a motion on every single item. We're more kind of giving staff staff direction. So, I mean, I guess if we wanted to take the time and energy to make a formal motion on every single item, we can certainly do that. We probably need a whole extra meeting to go through just the COVID stuff as we've done. So, but, you know, fairly routinely, as we're giving staff direction, it's more just, you know, hey, do we have general agreement? But if that's concerning to any particular commissioner, they can always call for a motion and a formal vote. So go
Gotcha.
ahead, Mayor.
No, I appreciate your efforts to save time. I just wondered if that was proper, even with relatively small items.
I mean, this is
I'm okay
the
with it.
language, your current language, so
Right,
if you want
okay.
to change it, that's up to you.
Okay.
So on the functions and, excuse me, powers of the mayor, the only change we made was adding the requirement for the mayor to present an annual state of the city address at a public meeting. I believe the mayor did that this year. And the committee really liked that idea and decided it should be required to be an annual event.
So one comment on this, just to clean up, I think the term public meeting would denote a meeting that requires, like, you know, taking a roll and minutes, et cetera, which is not really the spirit of a state of the city. So I think it'd be a public city address more so than a public meeting. So I plan on proposing some tweak to that language.
Yeah. And I think the committee wasn't really talking, they didn't want it just to be at a meeting. They wanted the whole public to be invited.
That's what I think that's the heart of it. That's what I was just adding for clarity, make sure nobody
Sure.
disagreed. But yes, it will certainly be public, but not a public meeting where we have to go through all the process of a public meeting.
I think where we got to a meeting was that not every mayor is wanting to do something as big as what you did. And if they wanted to present it at a meeting, that would be okay, but that would be covered by a public city event. So
Yeah, a public annual state of the city address is
Yeah.
probably what I would propose.
I agree.
Okay. So now we have Article 3, which is all the charter officers now have their own article. And so on the appointment and removal, it just covers all of them, just stating how they get appointed and removed, and that's by a majority vote again of the entire city commission, and that's how you do it currently. And then we've broken it out for each of the 3 charter officers. So the first one is the city manager, made a change to the appointment. The current language for what you're looking for, the appointment is now to be made on the basis of education and experience. And the other change in this section A is that the committee felt pretty strongly that the manager should live in the city limits. You don't have that requirement now. Many cities have that, but it gives an out. There might be an extraordinary reason why within 6 months the manager could not rent or purchase, you know, a place within the city limits, and the city commission would have the ability to waive that if they so chose at that time. But basically, it's asking that the city manager be a resident of the city. The next
Marilyn?
part, yep.
So we spelled out specifically in the city manager how he could be removed, but we did not address the city attorney or the city clerk. Should we have not have had a generalized under the initial heading that all charter officers will be removed by X, Y, or Z, and then list each one of them as to their duties and responsibilities?
So in 3.01, it does say shall appoint and remove them by majority vote, and it lists the 3 charter officers.
I think Commissioner Harmon's point is then you've got section 3.02C where we spell out removal process for city manager, which is either duplicative with the early section or missing in the later sections for the others. So yeah, I think we'll just want to, I think I agree, making that maybe a general heading that applies to all the chartered officers.
Right.
Any on the commission see a concern with that, or on the committee rather, see a concern with that? Any intent with that we were missing? Okay.
See, that's the current language, the removal part, other than making it gender neutral. So we didn't even think about that for the other charter officers, but yeah.
Oh, Marty, did you have something?
No.
No, okay, sorry. Go ahead. Marilyn, go ahead.
So on D for the city manager, I don't know why I have D before. Oh yeah, D. This commission will appoint someone and you'll have it on file who, if something happens, city manager has a heart attack or is in a car accident, God forbid any of those things happen, but is unable at that time to designate anybody. And then for the city commission to first have to figure out who's going to become the acting city manager now, and you have assistants and, ordinarily that would be, but this is just to make sure that somebody has been designated in advance, it's on file, so any transition would be very smooth and that person would take over immediately as city manager if need be until the manager was able to return to office. And the commission can change that designation if they decide, we got the wrong person, they're not doing a very good job, we can change that person. So. Are there questions?
No, I am hearing some background noise from someone though. If you're not on mute, it looks like Marty, it may be you.
Wait a minute, hang on.
There you go. Thank you.
So under the powers and duties of the city manager, the committee made a few changes. First of all, in your current charter, it requires the city manager to attend all committee meetings. And I understand that doesn't happen and probably shouldn't happen. So that's been deleted. We did add the requirement for the manager to submit the annual capital program to the city commission. And these are probably done, but it's not specified in the charter, and implement the approved budget, not just submit a budget, but then implement whatever the elected officials approve. And the city manager under this would also have to submit an annual report on finances and activities at the end of each fiscal year and make other reports as requested. And then there were some things in the model charter that are nice things for city managers to do, and the committee liked them. So you'll see those that are included as far as assisting with the strategic plan, which goes along with what's in your preamble and what's in the requirement for the city commission to do strategic planning, and this promoting partnerships. We have deleted the obligation for the manager to be the purchasing agents. In many cities, there's expertise that's involved in being a purchasing agent. Doesn't mean your manager couldn't be the purchasing agent, but doesn't make the manager have to be the purchasing agent. So we deleted that requirement, and we deleted the requirement to negotiate settlement agreements of litigation. That might be something an attorney might be better at doing. So those were the basic changes that were made. The rest were all left in place.
So, Marilyn, I've got a quick idea here. I'm wondering, I'm gathering from the commission's input. I know for me, I've got a list of specific items that I wanted to ask about, and then most of it was fairly self-explanatory. I'm guessing Vice Mayor and others have a similar list in front of them. So I'm wondering if it might just be quick. I'm looking at the time, and I'm wondering if it might be more expeditious to just go, as we go through and see what the commissioners had a particular question on that we wanted to bring up. And then certainly if there's an item that is, a larger type item that we need to talk through, we can do that. Is everybody on the commission okay with taking that approach? I'll just maybe call out like section 3, and then we can, if anybody has a comment on or question or on section 3, and then we'll keep going down the line. Everybody okay with that? Any objections to doing it that way from the commission?
No objection.
Okay. All right. So I think we're at section 3. So any or article, we'll call it article 3. Any comments on article 3 other than those that have already been made? Any other comments on article 3 from any on the commission?
Yes, I do.
Yes, Vice Mayor, go ahead.
Okay, going down to the duties of this is 3.03A in parentheses. Says the attorney shall represent in all legal proceedings. And I know we often hire special counsels, such as just at our last meeting, we had a special counsel appear on an ordinance. Does this conflict with that policy and the way we've been operating on?
I
I
would
would
loosen up
Go
that
ahead.
language. I think we should loosen up the language. But we can
Okay.
work on stuff later if that's the will of the commission.
Yes, because I would like to see it if you have a designate, then, which we've always approved, so the wording should go along with that.
So for the Charter Review Committee benefit, that basically, I think what he's saying is commission would probably consider language to say city attorney may delegate that, as needed to specialty law firms, and we'll have to get way better language than that. But we do that now fairly routinely. No one attorney can be an expert on everything, although Carrie comes close.
And there's code language too that we have to, there's language in our code of ordinances that allows the employment of the other attorneys. So we'll have to marry those sections together to make sure there's no conflict.
On the next section, and that's very good. On the next section, as I often get correspondence from our city attorney, she's got a whole bunch of little letters behind her name as to certifications, specifically concerning being a municipal attorney. Should we add that in as a qualification?
You may limit your future pool of applicants if you did that. That's would be my hesitation.
The committee did discuss this. That's why we added have experience in local government law, because they really wanted an attorney who had that, but they might not be certified in it. So that, going along with what Carrie says. So the committee felt that just providing that, you're going to look for someone who's worked in local government law before.
I can accept that.
I've met people who didn't have the credentials but had 20 years experience, and then I've met people who had the credentials but have never actually worked in the field, and I'd take the former every time. Any other on Article 3? So all of the things related to Article 3. Any other questions or comments from the commission? All right. Article 4, financial management, covers a pretty good broad swath there. Any comments, questions on that? I had one. I'll kick it off. Oh wait, no, I've already covered it. So again, the dates here, just want to make sure we leave enough room that in an extreme scenario, if the budget isn't finished on August 1st, what happens? What then? So I want to make sure we've got enough leeway in there for those catastrophic type things.
And Mayor, during one of the recent hurricanes, the governor allowed cities to move the dates for the budget process. The main reason this one is here, and this is just submission of the budget to the commission, is to make sure that the commission has enough time to really look at this budget before they have to vote on it. So,
okay. If no others on Article 4, Marilyn, any major thing there that you feel like we needed to?
Well, the major thing was that your current charter doesn't have anything on your fiscal management, and that's a big part of your city. So the committee felt very strongly that there should be some information for your citizens to understand how this happens, and just as some guide for presentation of these important documents. And then the independent audit, which you're required to do by law, but we put some provisions in here that whoever's doing that audit, to maintain their independence, you shouldn't have them for more than 5 years, then you need to switch to somebody else. and that they can't do any other work for the city during the time they're serving as your independent auditor because the relationship gets too cozy and you're not sure how independent they are at that point.
Okay. Article 5, sustainability. Comments from the commission. I see Vice Mayor. Go ahead.
I'm glad to see this section in here. It's something we haven't had, and it's something that's very important. Unfortunately, there is a blending between our land development standards and our charter. And I think some of the items we've included here have kind of crossed the line. I want this section to be a guideline as to how to do it and point out some of the specific areas we should focus on, but they really belong in the other set of ordinances. You run the risk of having wording in here that I'm sure we could make a little better. But if you just go into A, removal of pollutants, draining into the aquifer. Why only the aquifer? It should be more of a general term as to what we should do, and our land development ordinance should take care of it. In section B, we have the word creating. It says one of our goals is to creating runoff into the Indian River Lagoon. Obviously, we're going to take out the word creating because we don't want to do that. But we also have the St. Johns River basin. It should just be a little broader as a direction as to go. The septic tanks, the septic systems, they're a great idea, but we are really, if we disallow the new septic systems by charter, we're taking a lot of land out of the hands of the homeowners. I don't like to see these things either, but you're making people's land undevelopable. We have a health department that supposedly can address these issues, and I really think we have to take a close look at these and see if we want them in the charter or in the land development regulations. I'm going to be promoting some changes to that. 5.02. I like the idea of preserving the special character of the city, but we say the mid-18th century history. A lot of our cities not here from the mid-18th century, and I don't know if we want to start putting those type of developments out in, let's say, the western part of the city. I'd be more than happy with taking mid-18th century out of the wording. In expanding the state historic district, we should just add in their wording in accordance with state or federal guidelines. Then we get to section 5.04, which is the sale, lease, or trade or gifting of public lands and structures. I like the idea. However, as commissioners, we've been voted in by the residents. If you have an instance such as there's currently going to be a proposal to lease some of our property, why should that have to wait, let's say, a year till we have an election before it can be put on a referendum? Why should we encourage the expense of the money for a special election? I just don't think that's appropriate. If there's a better way it could be worded and limited to major areas, I might be convinced on it, but as of now, I just can't support it at all. Thank you. Any committee member, once again, give me a call. If you got a real reason for it, I will listen to you as long as you wanted to explain it. Thank you.
Comment, Mr. Mayor?
Commissioner Sykes, go ahead.
So as you all know, sustainability, environmental stewardship are keynotes of my platform and wishes for the city. And the preamble kind of states them in a not a vague, but more not exacting terms. And they get a little more exacting in 501. But then we talk about, Mike brought up a good point, the vice mayor, going into the aquifer. Well, we have surficial waters as well. So there's language in here. What I want to know is what we've underlined, really important things like the disallowance of the addition of new septic tanks. Does this mean we are absolutely not going to allow new septic tanks? What we drain off into the Indian River, are we going to disallow or be required to put in baffle boxes? Will these items speak to actual things that we have to do? And then there's those other items about the selling and leasing of land. I'm very concerned about our relationship with the Utilities Commission. Can they sell land? Do they not need the approval of the City Commission? So there's a bunch of stuff in here that I think we need to define very well, and it's vague. It's always been vague throughout my term. And we're just starting to improve things, but I don't know if these items actually say we have to do this. We have to improve guidelines for flood-prone areas. We have a lot of high hazard areas. So that means we have to start doing stuff, right? Any comments from anyone?
So I would say it's, and this is something I was going to go back to, but I'll wait. But it says in the opening to it, it says that the city of New Smyrna Beach, blah, 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 shall enact the following ordinances to strengthen the standards with respect to ... So as written, it is saying basically to your point, Commissioner Sachs, that we would adopt ordinances that would disallow septics, that would incentivize the removal, that would change our water runoff requirements to include best practices. So it is saying we shall enact ordinances, and I'll come back and make some comments on that if others, after others speak. Any other comments from the commission on
So just quickly,
these items? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jake.
to go back, Mayor. So shall means we must, through ordinances, enact these things that we state in our charter. And I have one more big question. Have we determined if the Utilities Commission can buy and sell land without the authority? Because I know we have another section, Utilities Commission, but there's nowhere there is there a comment about, well, they can eminent domain land, but can they sell land? And here we talk about the city buying, selling, leasing. They are part of the city. So that's a big question. If anybody could speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
Around 4 o'clock today, I got an email from the Utilities Commission's attorney on their position on why they believe they can sell land. I have not been able to go through and look at all the various aspects of that email yet. I do know your previous legal counsel was of the opinion that they could not sell land. So I have not rendered an opinion on that yet. The UC's position is that they can, and I will be researching the matter.
Okay, Carrie. Thank you. This is very important to the future of our sustainability and our aquifer and our potable water. So, we got a charter. Let's put things in it that are important.
Okay.
So, Mayor,
Other
I
comments
think Sally Gillespie wanted to speak. She was the originator of this whole article. So,
Sure, Sally, go ahead. You're on mute, Sally. Hang on, Sally. Hang on, you're on mute.
Sorry, forgot about the mute. The points that have been presented by commissioners, I think, as to sentence structure or inclusiveness of specific items are worthy of debate. For me, what is not in question is the absolute necessity for placing in our charter very specific language about saving the assets of our city. We love our beach, except when it's really crowded, but we're so much more than a beach city. We have a multiplicity of assets. And those are listed, some of them are listed in Article 5. Let me make this point that comes from our preamble. Two aspirations that the citizens of New Smyrna Beach would have, we believe as a committee, would be fiscal responsibility and preservation of natural resources. The two are absolutely linked. We cannot have economic sustainability if we don't retain our desirability. In other words, the fuel for our economic engine are the assets that we have. And if we start selling off our public land, our green areas, if we give very long leases and we deny the public access to some of these wonderful aspects of our city, we're going to lose some of that appeal. If we don't pay attention soon, I mean really soon, to our historic neighborhoods. And incidentally, I forget which commissioner addressed Venetian Bay and so on. In this article, we mentioned specifically our historic neighborhoods, which tend to be beachside in certain areas and mainland. We are losing our historic homes rapidly. If we don't retain our historic footprint, we lose some of our charm. If we let our small businesses get outmaneuvered by franchises, we lose some of our charm. If we allow our buildings to tower over our tree canopy, we lose another asset. And we have been losing these assets. Now, I commend this commission for having passed some good ordinances that are reflected, in fact, in Article 5. The problem is, you commissioners can certainly enact ordinances, but you can also repeal them. And even though you may have some of this language in ordinances now, there is no guarantee that those ordinances cannot be repealed. If it's in the charter, if protections for the assets that are responsible for our success as a city, if these are not protected in our charter, that only the citizens can change, then I'm telling you, we are not going to be the successful city we are currently. I've lived through these bad terms that city commissions can make at times. And every time that happens, we lose another asset or a big chunk of that asset. So I don't care how you word this, but I do care deeply, deeply, as does the entire committee. The entire committee approved Article 5. So speaking, I think, on behalf of the committee, we don't care how you word it, but you make sure that in our charter, you protect our assets for sustainability of our city going forward. And I'm happy to answer any specific questions that were raised just now.
Okay, thank you, Sally. Any commissioner have any other comments or questions on this? All right, I have a couple. I'll dive in. So agreeing. So I'm in complete agreement with much of what Vice Mayor said and what Member Sally Gillespie said. So the question is, how do we craft Article 5 in such a way? I think there's a few things. For instance, the the explicit language on the disallowance of additional new septic tanks. Love the concept. I've asked whether we could do that or not before. And the answer is, if you take someone who's in an area, they own property and they're in an area where there's no service in that area, if we have this and we have an ordinance that says this, we've now effectively taken their property. And so there's going to be a line at the door of people to sue the city for a taking case. So, I think we're going to have to take this and work with our city attorney to figure out how we can get there with with language that will protect the things we want to protect, but also not open us up to extreme exposure to I forget the act, but the act that is so powerful on the state side on the property owner rights. So
Bert Harris.
Yeah, the Bert Harris. Yeah, thank you, Jake. So I think that's going to take some creativity on our part, and I'm certainly willing to push the envelope a little bit. I think that the citizens universally would be very in favor of this. The question is, though, how do we craft this in such a way? And I don't think we're going to figure it out tonight. I think we're going to have to work with our city attorney and get good guidance on this. Of if we can't disallow them, what can we do? Can we require a certain kind? Can we put limitations from distance from rivers and wetlands? Are there things we could do? And I'm just using that one, section D as an example. So that's for that particular item, that's some of my concerns. On historic preservation, so 503, the idea of utilizing code enforcement to facilitate. I think that's language we're going to have to tweak a little bit. We may not call it code enforcement in a few years. So I think we might have to tweak that language. And then lastly, I think the big one, and Vice Mayor made this point well on the leases. I'll tell you on the sale lease. I've thought about this a lot. I've talked to a few people about this. Certainly, I think there are routine leases that would fall within the purview of the commission, or for some inconsequential ones, perhaps even at a staff level. A lease of a long time, 99 years, 50 years, that's effectively selling the property. Selling prime land in New Smyrna, selling things that I would call community assets. I think we certainly should have provisions around those. So I plan on bringing up to the commission. My concern with this is any lease, to Vice Mayor's point, that can be, we have a speed of business we have to operate in here, and so it can be a little tough to, this may impose a little bit of a restriction on things that are unintended. If someone wants to lease, a room, an office from us out of the chamber building, do we need the public to vote on that? So yeah, I think we can craft language. What I would be in favor of is we craft language where we have designated hallmark properties or landmark properties around the city, and we say, listen, this list of properties can only be sold with the city's approval, or with the citizens' approval, and leases over a certain length of time can have to be done only with citizens' approval, because it's effectively selling it. So I haven't fully vetted all of that with even our own attorney, but that's just kind of where my head is. The spirit of all this, I think many people in the community and even on the commission are in agreement on. It's how do we make sure we craft it that we don't step in anything, and we give all the right, it clears all the right legal hurdles, I guess. So that's kind of my general thoughts on section 5. We'll come to Vice Mayor, and then Sally will come back to you. Go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Right. Well, I started this whole discussion off. Sections 501, 502, 503. It's wording, and it's dealing with the perception of what we want to do. Everything in it's fine. I agree with everything. of all the commissioners, I've probably been one of the most environmentally concerned of the bunch, and I want to do that. But I just want to give you an example. Section 504. We lease basically city space to merchants to put tables out on the sidewalk. Does that have to go to the voters? What if we have a piece of industrial land, let's say along 44, that's worth $2 million? Shouldn't we have the ability to sell that with restrictions placed by the commission, that the money be dedicated to buy additional environmentally sensitive lands? We don't want to lose the opportunity to do things like that. So that's my concern on that particular section. Thank you.
Sally, you had other comments.
Yes. Your point on leasing is certainly well taken, and I rather like the idea. I don't know, of course, how my colleagues on the committee feel about this. We'll have an opportunity to appear before you at public participation, and we'll be able to express those opinions in that way. But I think the listing of lands that we really consider to be jewels and assets for our city, and which belong to the public for their enjoyment in perpetuity, should be listed in the charter, and the leasing addressed perhaps in a different way. Talking about septic tanks, I think very definitely we should have some requirement that developments that are depending upon septic tanks be made to do decentralized sewage treatment systems. These can be checked by our own utilities commission. The residents then are required to pay for that. It's not a burden on the developer. The citizens pay for that decentralized system just as they do, just as all of us do, who are not in septic tanks, pay each month for wastewater treatment. So my point is, the one section on flooding is actually taken from DeLand's city charter. And we do have to be smarter than we have been about how we grow and change. We have to consider design standards that are going to prepare a future generation for rising seas. We are already having flooding where we've never had it before. As a city, it's our responsibility for the health and safety of people who are tearing down homes and building new ones, or buying raw land and developing on it, to anticipate the future. It's the same with our historic neighborhoods. These neighborhoods have a value to our city that is economic. It contributes to our sense of place, but we can use code enforcement to identify a historic building that is beginning to crumble, and to approach the owner and say, look, we have some funds for you so that you can repair this building and save those buildings. We're tearing down our history because they're neglected. So often people can't afford the repairs. Many cities step in and save their historic places. We have to think out of the box. And as I said a little while ago, I think the committee will be very open to how you word this and how you tweak it, but to ignore it and not to live up, as you said, Mayor Owen, to the spirit of it, would really be a huge disservice, not only to the people of New Smyrna Beach now, but to your children and to those of our future generations. So consider this, please, very seriously. I'm sure you'll come up with good language and will preserve our city and sustain it for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. On the commission on this Article 5, questions for the Charter Review Commission. So I did want to pose it. I know Sally has spoken at length on this. I did want to pose it for any others on the Charter Review. The concerns I mentioned around the sale and lease. Again, I think the spirit of it, and again, we as a commission have to have this debate, because even just tonight, I've learned, I think Vice Mayor and I don't know if we're totally aligned or not, and we'll figure that out. But from the Charter Review standpoint, I'd just like to know, is anyone vehemently opposed with what I had said about, instead of this being kind of a blanket thing and so all-inclusive, if there are provisions around, listen, these lands are considered, public assets and they should never be sold or without the citizens' approval. But leases over a certain time should be considered the same as a sale, because it effectively is selling it for a generation or more. But these types of things that are more routine in nature, maybe it's below a certain threshold, below a certain dollar amount, below a certain time amount. They're more routine business. That is something that, say, hey, the commission can do this, and or even, again, if it's below a certain threshold, staff can do that. And I don't know they have to have all that language in the charter, but any grave concern from the Charter Review Committee on that language or that concept? Okay, seeing none. And like Vice Mayor said, feel free to reach out to me, independently as well if you want to have a deeper debate. But I'm trying to give you a sense of where my head's at as we go through this process. Yes, Marie.
I just want to make a comment, just more of a broad scale comment. Don't take the fact that the rest of the committee is being silent for the fact that we are not wholeheartedly supporting Sally. We chose her as the spokesperson for this article, but we feel very, very strongly, and we're not attorneys, and we had to put this together in a fraction of a meeting. So I understand that some of this may need to be tweaked legally, and we may need to look at some other aspects of it. But we all feel very, very strongly about preserving our natural resources and preserving our history and our land. So just wanted to add that commentary. Thank you.
I appreciate that you did. Thank you. All right. Yes, Christine.
I would appreciate actually the committee's work on this section, and certainly am in support of the sort of sense of these things. However, I also brought up concerns, as did the Vice Mayor, regarding some of the sort of blending that happens both with land development and with other ordinances that are already in place. I think many of these things can be addressed in other ways, and while we have this language in the overall report, I think our elected officials have ways of addressing these things that are already in place, and I'm not certain that we want to tie hands, particularly on things like the section on sale and lease of property. So not everyone is in lockstep on this issue among the committee members. Just my point.
Okay. Others. Okay. I think Marvel's trying to unmute. I'm going to give her a second.
There we go.
There we go. All right, Marvel, go ahead.
I, as a member of this charter review, 100% support Sally and everything she said. And I think for the most part,
Leslie.
We did
Hang on,
support.
hang on, Marvel, if you could. Jake, you're not on mute, just so you know. Commissioner Sachs, if you can mute. All right, Marvel, go ahead.
Okay. I think that for the most part, everyone did support what Sally said. The one thing that was possibly an issue was the lease, not the sale of the property, but the leasing of the property. But otherwise, we were in unison on this, as far as I remember. And
Okay.
I hope that you all can figure out a way to do this to save this city, because it's not gonna work otherwise. And as you say, it's not for us at this point. It's for the next generation, that your children. You know. Anyway, that's my thought on it.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Seeing no others, we will move on.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Marty, go ahead. Marty, you're a red
Again,
screen for me right now.
I'm sorry?
There's something in front of your camera. You're a red screen. There you go.
I'm sorry. To simplify this entire question and echo what Sally and Marvel are talking about, the sentiment within the committee is so strong. It's simply a question of what you have to do, and let's not stumble over how we have to do it. Future of the city is at stake. It's that simple. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Seeing no others. Marty, if you can go back on mute, please.
Okay.
All right. Okay. I don't see any others, so. Next item up we had was Article 6. Anyone on the commit? I think the major change here was we're kind of just following the election laws of the state of Florida and getting out of trying to have our own things. And those of us that have run for office know that, you know, we had some special things in the city, like having to qualify within a certain period. Those dates didn't line up with the county board of elections. So any comments on anything in Article 6 from the commission?
Mr. Mayor.
Commissioner Hartman? Yep. Go ahead.
Yes. I was just curious as why this didn't follow the makeup of the city committee, because it specifically talks about the commission itself, and why it didn't follow that section of the charter and is put back past all of these other articles. Why that didn't end up being like number 2 or 3 or something like that.
Marilyn, any thoughts on that?
It was pretty arbitrary as we were going through. I just inserted or moved it around, and it's an election section, so you could put it any place if you want to renumber. I don't think we had any huge rationale for it being where it is.
Okay. Any other members of the commission? Anything on Article 6? All right. Marilyn, anything major to call out that we might have missed?
Well, I think the main thing you've covered is that you fall now, and your charter currently says you should follow the state election laws, and then you add all these other details that aren't part of that. We did make a change that I think is fairly big in section 6.05, because currently now when you have, say, 3 people running in a primary and one gets 50% or more of the vote, there's no need for a runoff. And our committee decided, no, there should be a runoff regardless. Just the top 2 vote getters should appear on the ballot in the general election. So that's a big change. And the other was, for some reason, when you have a tie vote, you currently now have to go to a special election. And I know of no other jurisdiction that does that. Everybody else just has a drawing of lots or straws or whatever you call it. And whoever picks the right one gets elected. So we've put that in there.
Commissioner McGurk, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. That's also a question I'd like to pose to the committee. What was the discussion on that? Why did that come forward in terms of changing if someone reaches more than 50% of the vote, why are they forced to go to a runoff with the top two? As opposed, in other words, why are you changing that? What was the spirit behind that?
I think Marty was the one who suggested that, so perhaps he can respond to it if he's still there.
Yes, I can respond to that. You look at numbers, and I assumed when I started looking at this that there was nothing nefarious afloat. But when you look at the thing and you realize that in the history there have been people that have entered as a third candidate, and then there's no runoff. And probably what happens in that scenario, you want to be in a situation where there is a general election, which, as we know, a substantial amount of more voters show up for the general election than do for the primary. So we think if you're going to have a legitimate election that shows the will of the people, then the top two vote getters ought to be included in that election and not someone get by on a technicality. Is that clear?
Yes, thank you. So I guess my follow-up question to that is going to be, does anyone know how many times that has happened in the last 20 or 25 years in this city? But more importantly, has there ever been a problem? Because as I go through this process, what I'm going to want to look at, I'm not going to create a litmus test. But what I am going to do is when we do make changes, I'm going to be looking for a specific reason as to why we should. And I would like to be able to reflect back on something tangible that has happened that shows why we should be making a change. That also goes for the other part that was named, a runoff election as opposed to, I guess, many cities do a coin toss. I don't need an answer on that. I'll certainly be reaching out to a number of you individually. But I certainly, I just wanted the idea of where that came from.
Yeah, yes, sir. And I can tell you, it in fact did happen. And I don't have the details at the top of my head right now, but I would be happy to share those.
Thank you.
Any others on the charter review that had a strong position on that? Because I had the same question. I mean, I could see it. Certainly, if it's, one person got 51% and one person got 49, and then you had a third candidate that got 10 votes. That's one scenario. But in a case where you had one person gets 60% and the other two people combined got 40%, so they split it. Let's say 20-20. It feels like it just feels different. So it's really, it can kind of go either way. But anybody else have anything in addition to what Marty said? Any strong concerns or feelings from the Charter Review Committee? Kirk? Kirk, I thought I was
Yes,
go ahead.
yes. We kind of kicked this one around a little bit. I thought there for a while we maybe even consider not even having a primary. Why go through that if you're not going to be able to accomplish? If somebody goes out and puts a lot of good effort and work, and he gets over, like say 60%. I've seen some get 70%. And you're going to put your town through a whole nother process of a couple months. Why even have a primary? Why don't you just have a general election and whoever gets the top vote wins? But that was kicked around, but we came up with this, and it's something, obviously y'all can debate.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Marty, if you can go back on mute for me, I'd appreciate it.
Oh, sorry.
Vice Mayor, go ahead.
I listened to the argument, and I kind of like Marty's argument. More people pay attention in the regular election. I would like to see, if you want to call it a runoff, a runoff. I think it's a good idea. Thank you.
All right. I did appreciate the cleanup on the term of office. I happened to be tuned in, I think, when that debate happened, and I thought whoever brought that out was a very good point about the after certification, because in a contested election type case, you could have a delay. So cleaning up that language, I thought was good. All right. So in last comments I had on this section, going back again to the dates, there's a lot of very specific dates in here where we talk about we shall do this within 30 days and then 60 days. We'll do that. Talking about the in the, I forget which section is in here. I think it's in the rezoning type thing or redistricting. So just feel like, again, we just want to make sure we've got emergency provisions for that. But if that's covered by something else, we can, then I'm fine. So anything else for Article 6? All right. Seeing none, we'll move to Article 7. Any commissioner questions for the committee or comments on Article 7? Vice Mayor, go ahead.
Now, just reading in the second line down, it says, shall be composed of citizens who are qualified to act. Who makes that decision? And do we really even have to say that?
That's our current language, I believe. So, I think.
Well, we're changing a lot of things. Just a question. What up?
So,
Thank you.
Just one state law for code enforcement. It tells you different disciplines you want to include. Some boards also, like planning and zoning. Some commissions like to dictate, oh, let's have a realtor, an architect, various disciplines. So that would be, if you had qualifications like that or to comply with state law, that would be qualified to serve.
Thank you.
So, any others from the commission? All right, and I may not, if commissioners, if you speak up, because I may not see you if you're just raising a hand. So don't be shy on unmuting and speaking up, commissioners. I had one. Just wanted to pose to the commission on this advisory boards, or to the committee rather. Sorry. It says shall be composed of citizens, and I think for 95% of our advisory boards, that is that's good. We probably want it to be citizens. I can think of a few cases where maybe there's particular expertise that we can draw in from external to our city. There are times when you might even want someone that's a little further removed from your local scene, if you will. So I know we don't have it now, but it's bantered around every few years, this notion of an ethics commission. If you ever had something like that, I think getting people like judges or attorneys from external to your city is the only way something like that could ever work. So I might like to just, to me, we could have that citizen language governed at the ordinance level when we form the whatever committee it is. And I think in most committees it would need to apply. But I may make a case that we don't necessarily need that in the charter, because we might have times when we wouldn't want to have that.
Mayor, so
yes.
we had some discussion. Actually, there was some wanting to change. Citizen does not mean a resident of New Smyrna.
Okay, and I had that as a question.
So citizen actually means you are a citizen of the United States of America.
Okay, got it.
If you wanted to allow non-citizens, you would have to change that. We knew, and Kelly had let us know, that you have certain boards that do have people currently who live outside your city who are on those boards, and we didn't want to limit or prohibit that. So that's
the
rationale.
And we have this nuance of many people that have a New Smyrna address, and but they're technically county residents, and that we've crossed that bridge a few times. The only other comment I had, just for clarity, is we talked somewhere in here, I think it's in 701 as well, about no compensation. which again, I agree with, but I do think that our utilities commissioners, I think there's a weird thing where they have $100, if I recall correctly. And so I just want to make sure we don't go in. I don't know why they get $100. None of them need the $100. So maybe we could change that part, or we need to fix this part.
Yeah.
Lisa, go ahead.
I was going to say the Utilities Commission does operate as employees. They get the $100 plus expenses.
Yeah, so Mayor, when we brought up that other issue, it was interesting, you know, is a UC commissioner in any way a city employee? It goes back to that discussion. Just to muddy it up a little more.
Yeah. So just and I know that the UC is covered in here, and I have one comment on that when we get to it. But yeah, just know for the committee's standpoint, I agree they should be voluntary. I actually think they should all be voluntary. But we'll have to just get legal counsel on whether that $100 or not. So, any others on Article 7?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Vice Mayor.
While listening, I went to section 7.05B, and the first section about number of signatures, we say 10%. Where'd that number come from? It seems pretty low, to tell you the truth. There must be justification for it.
Sally, go ahead. I see you waving. You're on mute, though. Sally, you're on mute. Hang on, Sally, you're on mute. There you go.
Sorry. Yes, that's the number that's required in our state's constitution and the number used by most cities. Why New Smyrna Beach had twice the requirement percentage, I don't know. But the model charter called for 10%. The state constitution calls for it.
So I think what Sally's referring to is charter amendments. There's a petition process for charter amendments, and that does in the state constitution have the 10%. And many cities use that same requirement for citizen initiative and referendum. Currently, you don't have a provision in your charter for citizen referendum and initiative, which is surprising because most cities do have that. It's not used very often, but it is something that the committee felt strongly should be available to your citizens.
So one other question I had in this section for city attorney, and again, not to be answered tonight, but just so the committee can chime in if they feel strongly or if y'all debated this. When I read section 705A, it says any 5 qualified voters may commence with this initiative or referendum proceeding. And then it goes on to give some parameters. And then I go down to section D, and it says when a referendum petition is filed, the ordinance sought to be reconsidered shall be suspended from taking effect. And so I guess I just want to make sure we don't open some weird loophole where any 5 residents, which could all have a very vested interest in a particular ordinance, could effectively suspend an ordinance by going through this process and get it suspended long enough to, do something. So, I know that probably wasn't the intent of the committee, so I'll have our attorney make sure. We might need to just tighten that language up. To me, it says once you've met the 10%, not just the start off of the referendum. So, Lisa, go ahead.
Just going to point out also on 705A, it simply states any 5 qualified voters, which would mean that somebody could come in from Oregon and North Dakota and 5 different states, 5 different people. They're qualified voters. So I think it would behoove us to just clarify that to indicate in the city.
Yeah, that's a good point.
While it may need clarification, it obviously means qualified as New Smyrna Beach, so you may want to add New Smyrna Beach. But there is a provision. The referendum is referring to repeal of ordinances. The initiative is just proposing an initiative. But if you see in 7.05B4, there is a time constraint because you have to get the petitions within 30 days. So that's to not allow people to keep this dragging on for months and months that your ordinance doesn't go into effect. So that is why that one has a specific deadline, a very short time period to collect those 10% petitions.
Yeah, okay. It still makes me a little nervous that any 5 people could delay an ordinance for even 30 days. Because again, you could have something that went into effect that affected someone's, and they were trying to do something, we were trying to stop it, and then they used this loophole to get around it. So we'll talk more through it, but good comments. I hope someone, Carrie or someone's making notes on some of these things like what Lisa just brought up. So,
And there's one clarification on this section. It's going to have to be amended. There's a state law, 163-3167 sub 8. An initiative or referendum process in regard to any development order is prohibited. Prior to June 1, 2011, if you had something on your books, could impact comprehensive plan amendments, but as of June 1, 2011, if it wasn't on your books, it cannot apply to any development order.
Okay. Well, that's a good point. And we did put in here that you couldn't do this in regards to appropriation of money, levy of taxes, or salaries of city officers or employees. So you could just add comprehensive plan, which I have had some cities put, even zoning ordinances, comprehensive plans, whatever you want to limit that you can't have initiatives or referendum on any of those specific areas.
okay. Any other comments from the commission on Article 7? All right. Article 8 is Utilities Commission, and as I read that section, and if I recall from the discussion, it seemed like this was mainly just renumbering and then Scribner type things with capitalization and whatnot. I think as a commission, we can have some debate and talk to our attorney on how much we can do here, and she can explain to us the different provisions, because I know this is codified at the state level, I believe, as well. I certainly have a few questions. I do think we need to seek clarity kind of once and for all on this authority related to selling of land specifically. It's pretty clear and enumerated on the eminent domain side and the acquisition of real property, not so much on the disposition of real property. So I think it would behoove us not tonight, but as a commission to let's just spell that out. So anything, Marilyn, to add on Article 8? Did I miss anything, or is it a correct statement there were basically no changes?
You're correct. We did not make changes other than the gender neutral and the renumbering. And that was a decision made by the committee for 2 reasons. One, time, that we did not have time to fully go through section by section of this. And the second was the debate, do we have the authority? And that's what you alluded to. If this was established as a state law, a special act, and that there's some consideration that you can't go do a charter amendment without having state do the changes of, change the special act. And so because that question was raised about legality of us even making any changes, and the committee did not feel they had the expertise in the utility area, and both the city attorney and the utilities attorney gave us comments that they didn't see any areas that needed to be addressed at this time. So we left it alone.
All right, Lisa.
Just one comment. I think you alluded to this earlier, Russ. The description or the qualification for the Utilities Commission commissioners just says New Smyrna, not City of New Smyrna. And that, as we know, leaves it open for unincorporated areas to be commissioners.
Okay.
Oh,
okay. Good comment. Sally.
Commissioner Sachs was concerned earlier about the right of the city in terms of land that is managed by the Utilities Commission. Section 8.11, last line, the title to all property, real or personal, owned or acquired by the commission shall be vested in the city of New Smyrna Beach. That seems rather clear.
Yeah, and as a, I can share my thoughts on it, and I will when it is the right time to talk about it. I think that, as I said, I think we just need to seek clarity as we go through this process. This is our chance to provide some clarity and make sure that we're all operating under the same assumption of what the different towers and entities can and can't do. So I've made my position clear to the city attorney, and then when it comes time and we'll talk about it, I'll make that clear at that time as well, to broader things. So I think we certainly should talk through that, because it does seem to be a point of confusion, and I'd rather just get it out in the open and get it settled. So,
Mr. Mayor?
All right. Yes.
Thank you, Sally, for your support on that. I did see that under 811 as well, and it raised a very large question. For the length of my term, in fact, I have questioned who has the authority to buy and sell. But on 803, a commissioner shall serve no more than 3 consecutive terms. We currently have board members that have served more, and I think we need to firm that up. We have language. I believe we need to stick by it. I don't know that it requires any more comment, but I think we need to have a firm action on that we don't just anoint people or say, well, I like this person, they've been doing a good job. We have term limits. So if it's in the charter, it should be upheld.
Okay. Commissioner McGurk, yep, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to point out we have term limits stated in the charter, and then we have an exception. The exception is in there because many years we've had times when we do not have people willing to serve on the board. The board goes empty. So for now, that hasn't been happening in recent memory, but that has been a problem in some boards. Some of the more obscure boards we have do have problems getting members. So I think that's a discussion that we can further along during our discussion, but I just want to give some insight into why that was like that. Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner McGurk, just real quickly, Commissioner McGurk, at some time, could you point out where that language is? It doesn't have to be now, but maybe we should have that discussion later. Let the meeting go on. Unless you can point out what item it's under. That
where are the term limits on the UC? I'm not seeing that.
803. Bottom of page 20.
Yeah, no, I see it. Yep. I was looking for it in 802. Okay. What I was going to say is that I think one other thing that has happened, I know on another board where there was term limits, that another advisory board, there were term limits that were put in place. I think prior to Kelly taking over in the clerk's office, it wasn't a great line of sight as the commission made these decisions. They weren't presented with how many terms that person had been in place. Maybe it's incumbent upon them to have done more due diligence, but I think now with the way we do this now and the way the clerk's team has upgraded that process, we just have so much more information in front of us as we're making that decision. And so we're able to see the requirements of the board, any term limits that are applicable, and the terms that are served. So I think some of this, honestly, in the past may have also just been they didn't know they were appointing someone in violation of this. So it may have been intentional, it may have been unintentional, but we are where we are, and I think we can fix it moving forward. So, Vice Mayor, I'm sorry, you had a comment?
No, just on the sale of property, I think we got to give special attention to that, to the sale of property, to leasing of property. I know they're very strict, and they actually make us give them leases to put things on our own property. And I don't want to see, without our input, leasing or sale of major tracts of land. I think we may need a new section to deal with that. Thank you.
Okay.
If I may, from the clerk's office, Kelly. The
Yes,
new
Kelly.
staff reports, new staff reports that the city commission and public will see, it will first list the current board members and the terms, how many terms that they've been on. And so it will be right there on the staff report on that page. It generates it automatically when we do the report.
Yeah, the clerk's office, the public hasn't seen all of the work they've been doing yet. A lot of it will be unveiled in the next little bit, but they've just been doing some fantastic, the whole city team really, but the clerk's office specifically has been making some major upgrades that are going to start rolling out here, and pretty impressive stuff. All right, Article 9, miscellaneous provisions. A lot of this was cleanup. It looks like this is where things kind of got dropped previously. It all kind of landed here. So if you look at the redacted version or the red line version of this, this section has mostly just been cleaned up. And looks like this is where a severability clause landed. And so any comments from the commission on Article or Article 9? I lost my place, but any comments? Hearing 9. Marilyn, anything to add on Article 9?
No, we just deleted things that were in other places in the charter, and things like the golf course. I mean, since you have all the powers to do whatever you want to do, you can do whatever you want to do with golf courses. It doesn't have to be specified, as no other areas are.
Okay. All right. Any closing? Actually, I want to go back to this item. So mention first, Marilyn. Anything from a review standpoint? We covered all the articles. Did I go too fast on anything? Do we need to come back to anything?
No, I think we're good with that. We do want to talk about the implementation strategies. So.
All right. So go ahead. I'll turn it over to you for that.
Okay. So, as you all know, as the city commissioners, this whole report is advisory to you. So you can accept all the recommendations. You can tweak, as you've already indicated, you probably will, some of them. You can delete some of them. You can add things that you think are important that aren't in this. But then the decision comes down to how do you put this before the voters? Because, of course, none of these changes can be made unless the voters vote in favor of them. So you have two options. You can put a list of specific separate amendments to the charter on there. And in my counting, there's more than 30 changes, probably even more than that, because you have to group some of them. Under state law, you are only supposed to have a question that deals with one issue, although you can, if it's a city manager issue, you can have several things, but you're confined to 75 words. So it makes it problematic. The November ballot, which you're aiming for, is going to be a very long ballot. Besides the national, state, county, local elections, and state constitutional amendments, as you know, the city elections fall to the bottom of the ballot. And then after your elections, the bottom of the ballot would be your charter amendments. So there's such a thing as voter fatigue. People stop voting after a certain point. They just aren't interested, or they don't care, or they're tired, or whatever. So when the committee looked at the option of having a list of amendments, they knew it had to be confined. You couldn't probably put more than 10. I mean, I've seen cities put 15 amendments. It gets very confusing and very difficult for the voters. Or you could use another option. You could have one question on the ballot, which would be to adopt the revised charter. Now, you could, in the 75 words, indicate any major changes in the revised charter so that people would have some understanding of what they're voting on, and they vote yes or no. So the pros for doing that, of course, are you eliminate having this long list of amendments that are going to confuse people, and it's going to be much easier for the citizens. You would have to do an extensive citizen education campaign, which I think you need to do regardless of which way you put it on the ballot. So you solve, that problem of voter fatigue by not asking them to vote on 10, 15, whatever. The con of this is if you only put one question on the ballot and there's something that's very controversial, you may get people to say, I am so much against this that I'm going to vote no on the whole thing. And you lose all the good stuff in the charter. Now, I've worked with 2 cities that just put the yes or no question on there, and it passed in both of those cities. Most of the other cities I've worked with put a series of questions on the ballot. One of the other problems, if you put a series of questions and some pass and some don't pass, you may not end up with as clean a revised charter as you'd like, because it still may be somewhat of a hodgepodge with old and new being intermixed. So the committee decided unanimously that they liked the one ballot question issue, which certainly makes it easier for Carrie because she doesn't have to come up with 15 or 16 different ballot questions. The other thing in your choice, you don't have to put them all on the ballot this year. You could put some questions and then 2 years later put some more, and 2 years later, but it'll take you a while to get to a good chart, a good clean charter. And the other thing that you could do, you could, if there is something that you think is highly controversial, you could pull that out and have 2 questions on the ballot. Something that, the basic whole charter, revised charter is adopted, this section is changed or not changed, and have that as a separate question. So those are going to be the options that you'll have to look at. And as you've already indicated at the beginning of the workshop, Mayor, the need for a really good citizen education program is something the committee is very committed to. And I think volunteered to assist with that, but you'll certainly need to make sure people understand. And I think I shared with you and with the committee, you are allowed to spend your revenues, your city money on educating the citizenry. You cannot use it to advocate for or against any of the charter amendments, however you put it on the ballot. So you can't say, please vote yes on this or please vote no on this, but you can put out, this is what it means, this is what will change, and make sure that people can understand what's going on.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, question for Marilyn.
Sure.
Marilyn, it's kind of obscure, but it actually came up when I was in my youth. The city of Miami Beach actually put in the charter a proposition that only the electors, the residents of Miami Beach, could remove or allow their police and fire to go to the county, that they could only make the decision, not the city commission. And I don't believe we have that will now, but it could happen someday. Could or should we put language in like that?
Well, I certainly I've known of cities that.
Marilyn, hang on. I need clear. When you say go to the county, you mean be taken over, disband our force and be taken over by the county like O'Kill did?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
So I know of cities that have that provision because they put into the charter, there shall be a police department, a city, police department or city fire department. And if you try to take it out, you have to go to a vote of the citizens. And of course, the police and fire departments work really hard campaigning against that. The reason for not putting it in there has to do with not tying the hands of the elected officials. What if your city got into dire financial straits and you could no longer afford your own fire department and you wanted to contract, with another city or with the county or whatever to provide that service? You'd have the ability to do that. You may get a lot of pushback from your citizens, and you'd do it at public meetings and you'd have the understanding, but if you had to do it, you'd have to do it. Now, the city of Altamont Springs gave their fire department to the county, and they've loved it because they get the same level of service. They have a much lower millage rate because they're not paying, pensions for firefighters. So there's debates on both sides, but my personal recommendation would be not to put it into the charter, not to put yourself in that box.
But on the opposite side of the coin, a commissioner could bring it up when we consider our charter as a possible
Sure.
addendum to the charter. Right. In actuality, it did happen. Otherwise, the county took over a municipality's fire department. The citizens ended up not liking it, and they actually went back to their own fire departments. So I see both sides of the coin. But thank you for your help.
Okay. So real quick, so Marilyn, thank you for summarizing kind of the next step in this, and certainly I think that educational campaign is important. The commission will have to decide. I've heard the recommendation from the Charter Review Committee on, they doing one kind of comprehensive, up-down vote. I think I may lobby that we do one major vote that takes the bulk of these, but you take just the items we talked about tonight. There's been one or two that has generated a lot more discussion than the entire bulk of the rest. So I might see if the commission would support taking those 2, 3, 4 of the top items that, if we're even fairly divided on it, you feel that may translate to the community. So I'd hate to risk losing all of the great work of the Charter Review Committee on the 1 or 2 items that are possibly controversial. So I'd rather see us put those on a separate ballot. But we can, as a commission, we'll have that debate. That's something we have to debate and ultimately decide how we put this forward to the voters. And I think you've given us a lot of good thoughts and ideas about how to approach that, and even the idea of, hey, it's nothing that says it all has to happen this time. We can even if something doesn't pass this time, we can always bring it back, or we can, if we feel it's too contentious, we can wait and take more time to do more education and explaining and public polling. So I wanted to come back to the next item I'm going to do is go through. I'm going to come to you, Vice Mayor, but the next item I'm going to go to, just so everyone's ready, is asking about the term of the Charter Review Committee and what duties there may be left, and where we proceed from here from a Charter Review Committee standpoint. So, but Vice Mayor, you had something quickly.
Yes, I'm going to give you my preference right now. I think there should be one vote. I heard your justification. I find that one vote, up or down, would be the way to do it. Personally, I see absolutely nothing controversial in these changes. We are not asking the citizens for money, so I think that we will get quite a large approval. We have we will be promoting it, and we'll promote it as protecting the environment and just updating our standards, which haven't been done for a long time. I think it would be very successful. The committee's done a great job. Minor changes need to be made. I'm for it.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to just go through quickly, and the way we'll do this is I'll just call you out because I've got everyone on my screen here, and that's the only order I know to go in. So I'll just call on each of you. And so my simple question for you is, would you rather have the commission sunset the committee now and kind of release you from this so that you're out from under sunshine, and if you're at a meeting, you don't have to worry about if another committee member is present, and so therefore you have to be careful what you say? Or do you want to stay formed as a committee? I'll tell you from my standpoint, I think from Maryland's standpoint, there's no more meetings. There's no more formal meetings to be had. There's no more. Frankly, we're out of time. Like the commission has to start debating this, so we can't send you all back to re-debate anything and come back. We've got to figure it out and move forward. So I don't have any more work to be done, but I certainly don't want to, have this notion that the commission tried to, shut down the Charter Review Committee, because that's not it at all. So I'm going to pose it to you all, and I'm not saying the commission will go with your recommendation, but we all wanted to hear it when this came up at our last meeting. So, so just briefly, do you want to end now or stay on until, I think the term ran through September, if I recall correctly, September 7th or so. So Marvel, you're up first on my screen.
I'm up, and I'm for ending it now. And
Okay.
then we we can promote and we can, speak freely at your public meetings. And so I'm for ending it.
Okay. Lisa, you're up next on my screen. Lisa Martin.
I'm comfortable with closing it now.
Okay. Kirk, you're on mute. Kirk was on mute. I'm going to come back to you. Tricia, you're next, and then I'll come back to Kirk.
Yeah, I agree. Sunset it now, and that way we can promote and do all the things we need to do.
Okay. Kirk, if you want to go off mute real quick. There you go.
Yeah, I'm definitely for it. That way we can do some things. We don't have to worry about the sunshine.
All right. Eric?
I agree. Disbanding now, I think, is good, and any public meeting I'd be happy to be a part of just to discuss my views. So, as a citizen.
All right. Christine?
I'm fine with sunsetting it now, and as Eric said, happy to participate in a public meeting.
All right. Take a couple more, Terry. I think I've hit majority, but
I agree with going ahead and disbanding now as well for the same reason.
okay. All right. So I'll save a little time here. Any of the last of you, any major case to make against it? Is everybody in basic agreement with that? Marty, I see you. All right, Marty, go ahead. I'll let you comment. You're on mute. Go ahead.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Mayor. I think if you look at the preamble, which is a great piece of thought, and that preamble says, this is the kind of city we want, and this is how we know we can get there. So our challenge in getting this approved is to deliver on the promise of the preamble. And I agree with Commissioner Colodi. If we deliver on the promise of the preamble, I do believe it will pass by a wide margin. The city has been looking at that for years. The city is trying to do a good job. We've turned the corner. Now let's finish the job and deliver on the promise.
All right. Marie.
I just have a question. I'm in favor of sunsetting, but will we still be notified individually when there are these educational meetings, or will we go back to being the general public and just have to find out about them like everyone else does?
No, I think that's an excellent point. And I think on behalf of me, and I think the commission would agree, you've earned the right to be on the email list for sure. So I would say certainly you would be notified of when there's meetings. It's going to take kind of two tracks. We as a commission have to talk about it. So we'll either schedule a workshop or at a regular commission meeting, like we'll have those discussions. And then once we get, we figure out how we're going to approach this, then it becomes kind of this educational campaign where we're going out to the public and holding, meetings at the Brandon Center, trying to engage the different groups, your HOA, your the League of Women Voters. Like we want to get this information out as far and wide as possible. And that's where I think you all can help be some of our biggest advocates, is just being willing to help answer questions. And, you were the behind the scenes on this. You heard the thought process in the rooms you were in, and now you've heard the thought process from the commission, and we'll continue to hear that. So in short, yes, we'll make sure you're notified specifically of anything kind of related to this that goes on, and we'll look for opportunities to involve you all. All right, so I think the overwhelming sentiment was to go ahead and disband. Everyone is comfortable with that. And, worst case scenario, we can always reconvene. So any other items that we needed to cover? That was all that I had on my list. Marilyn, anything else you needed?
Mayor,
Yes.
your intent is to sunset the committee at your next regular meeting,
Yes.
because you can't do it at the workshop, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's not
And
effective
so they're
now.
still under sunshine until your
Correct.
next official
Okay.
meeting. So we don't want anybody violating at this point.
Yeah. So the Charter Review Committee is still a standing committee until our next meeting, which is on June the 9th. I want to say
June 9th, it says on the key dates
June 9th.
at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, so at the June 9th meeting, we'll take a motion that night and sunset this. So at that point, you'll be released from that. But until then, continue to follow all the precautions you were given up front. So
Just for clarification, for purposes of the record,
Sure.
the commission will consider sunsetting the Charter Review Committee at the June 9th meeting. It will be decided then.
Valid point. Yes. Thank you.
And Mayor, if I could say one last thing, although the committee will be sunsetted, I would be available to any of the commissioners, to Carrie, to Kelly, for if you need any further assistance at this point, just give me a call.
Thank you. And on behalf of the committee and the commission and really the entire city, we appreciate it. And I think you did a fantastic job of leading us through this process, and your perspective of having gone through this with many other cities, was always very helpful, I think, to the committee and to us. So I know I called you a few times to pick your brain on the process. Mainly it was stressing about the timing, I'll admit. So, but we got through it, and we're here tonight, and now we can kick off this next exciting phase, which is to talk through it as a commission. So any final thoughts from the commission, or Carrie or Kelly or Colin, anything I missed that we need to cover?
I do have something. It's Kelly.
Yes, Kelly, go ahead.
If I can suggest, usually the Charter Review Committee had a public participation in the beginning and the end. After the first one in the beginning of this, I noticed a few more people from the public join in. Is it possible to ask if there's any more public participation since they're here? Would you mind?
I don't mind at all. If they've stayed this long, I guess they've earned their right, and that's why we're all here. Again, no actions taken tonight. We're ready to adjourn. We're going to discuss all of this as a commission, but if there's any members of the public that wish to speak, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, and I'll call on you if anyone unmute here. I'm seeing no one unmute.
Mayor, this is Colin, if I may just to remind you that the last city commission meeting, we're going to schedule 2 public meetings regarding the charter review between the 11th and the 18th. So right now it's tentatively one on the 11th and one on the 18th.
Of June.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
the Brannan Center is only available on the 18th. The City Commission Chamber is available on both days. It's up to you where you would like to have it.
Yeah, I'll defer to staff. If the Brannan Center is available, I think we can probably safely have it at the commission chamber, but I'll defer to staff. We could also maybe the Live Oak Center or something like that, but whatever you all need. Carrie, go ahead.
I just wanted to let everyone know. So there'll be 5 more opportunities to weigh in on this for the public. So you're going to have June 11th, June 18th, June 23rd, July 28th, and August 11th. So we're trying to get the public involved.
And some of those were regularly scheduled commission meetings that you just named out, Carrie, and then some were the
Correct.
special workshops.
Yeah, June 23rd, it'll be a regular commission meeting. July 28th will be the special city commission meeting to set the tentative millage, but we'll have to do the first reading on whatever the ballot questions will be, or one or more. And then August 11th would be adoption of any ballot language.
Yeah. And really though, remember that gets us through that August 18th. So that's when we need input on the direction we're heading and comments on that. Once we hit August 18th, to me, that's when the real work begins. And that is making sure the public is educated on this. Because I'm in agreement with what's been said. I think fantastic work has been done. Much of these changes are overdue. So I'm hopeful we can make sure we've got that education process and all pull together on that to make sure the public understands what we're trying to do here, so that they can walk into that voting booth with confidence and vote what they think is right for their future and the city's future. So that we've got 5 more opportunities to kind of help craft it, but then we've got between August and November, that entire time, we'll be hosting more public information sessions. That's when we'll start working to get the language out. And that's when Phil really will kind of go from being us to Phil, our public information officer and the city staff will start coordinating some of those sessions. And at that point, we can't change anything about the ballot language, but we can help educate on the ballot language. So, all right. With that, again, thank you all so much for the extra time and effort put into this. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you to the facilitator, especially, and to all the city staff involved. And I hope everyone has a great evening. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, CRC members.
Thank you. Thanks, Marilyn. Thank you, Commissioner.